Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Household Food Security in the United States in 2014. My name is Nancy McNiff, and I will be your moderator. Our speaker today is Alicia Coleman Jensen. Alicia is a social science analyst with the Food Assistance Branch at the Economic Research Service, U.S. Department of Agriculture. Her research focuses on the measurement and determinants of food insecurity in the United States. She is the lead author of USDA's annual report on household food security, analyzing the prevalence and severity of food insecurity in U.S. households. This report includes changes in food insecurity from previous years, the prevalence of food insecurity by selected household characteristics, and food insecurity among children. I think we're ready to start now, Alicia, so you can begin your presentation.
Thank you, Nancy, and welcome to all those of you who are listening in online. First, I want to recognize my co-authors on the annual food security report, Matt Rabbitt and Christian Gregory of ERS, and Anita Singh of USDA's Food Nutrition Service. So the report released this morning describes the food security of U.S. households during calendar year 2014, and it's based on USDA's most recent annual food security survey conducted in December 2014. The report provides information on how many U.S. households had difficulty putting enough food on the table in 2014, and it reflects the extent to which difficult economic conditions result in material hardship in U.S. households. And for those of you who haven't already looked at the report, I'll skip to the bottom line now before we get too far. The percentage of U.S. households that were food insecure remained essentially unchanged from 2013 to 2014. However, food insecurity did decline from 2011 to 2014. Here's a brief overview of what we'll be talking about in the next few minutes. First, I'm going to review food security statistics and trends for all households, and then present statistics for the subset of households with children. And we'll talk about the main findings from the report released today. And then we'll touch on the food security survey and then some factors related to recent trends in food insecurity. First, statistics for all U.S. households. In 2014, 86% of U.S. households were food secure. That's 124 million households. And food secure here means that they had consistent access to adequate food for active, healthy living for all household members throughout the year. So 14% of U.S. households were food insecure. That's 17.4 million households. And we measure food insecurity at two levels of severity. So the overall food insecure households again was 14%. And these households were unable at some time during the year to provide adequate quantity or quality of food for one or more household members due to a lack of resources. The more severe range of food insecurity is labeled very low food security. So we divide food insecure households into those with low and those with very low food security. 5.6% of U.S. households experienced the more severe range of food insecurity, and that's 6.9 million households in 2014. And this subset of food insecure households reported that they had disruptions in normal eating patterns at times during the year, and their food intake was reduced below levels they considered appropriate. So what that means is that people in these households were reporting that they were skipping meals and not eating enough because they didn't have enough money for food. And again, that 5.6% of households is represented by the red pie in the pie chart. This slide shows the definitions of food security. And food insecurity is a household level economic and social condition, while hunger is an individual level physiological condition that is not measured directly. Very low food security describes the severe range of food insecurity, and that's the condition which may lead to hunger. So again, food insecure households were unable at some time during the year to provide adequate food for one or more household members due to a lack of resources. So you can think of these households as having difficulty putting enough food on the table for everyone in their household. And households with very low food security had disrupted eating patterns, and their food intake was reduced below levels they considered appropriate. Most households with very low food security reported that an adult in the household had been hungry at times but did not eat because there wasn't enough money for food. Like many things, food insecurity is a continuum. We can think of a range from fully food secure to very low food security. As households might begin to experience difficulties, they may worry about their food supply and stretch their budget, juggle items within their budget to try to get enough money for food. As situations worsen, they might reduce the quality and variety of their diet, relying on low-cost foods to feed their families. And as food insecurity becomes more severe, we see reductions in food intake, usually among adults first, and in the most severe situations, we see reduced food intake among children. This slide shows some examples of food security survey questions. In the survey, we include 10 questions about food insecurity for the household as a whole and adults in the household. And households with children are asked an additional 8 items about children's food insecurity. And households must respond affirmatively to at least 3 items to be considered food insecure. So examples of these questions are: the food that we bought just didn't last and we didn't have money to get more. Was that often, sometimes, or never true for you in the last 12 months? So all the questions reference the last 12 months. And all the questions include a resource constraint, so that people say that they couldn't afford food or they didn't have enough money for food. So we're not asking people about, for example, not eating enough because they're dieting or fasting or some other reason like that. These questions are all stipulated on the fact that they couldn't afford enough food for their family members. And you can see more severe questions ask about not eating for a whole day because there wasn't enough money for food. So now I want to turn to trends in food insecurity. 2014 is our 20th year of food security statistics. We've been measuring food insecurity in the U.S. since 1995. And you can see that with the onset of the recession, food insecurity increased substantially from 2007 to 2008. In 2008, 14.6% of U.S. households were food insecure. In 2011, we saw a peak of 14.9% of households food insecure. And we've seen a gradual decline since then, down to 2014, where 14.0% of households were food insecure. And just for your reference, in 2007, before the recession, 11.1% of U.S. households were food insecure. And those statistics are represented by the blue line on the chart. Now looking at the red line, which represents very low food security, we also see that there was an increase in food insecurity with an increase in very low food security with the onset of the recession. And it's been near that level since. It increased from 4.1% of U.S. households in 2007 to 5.7% in 2008. And again in 2014, 5.6% of U.S. households experienced very low food security. This slide shows statistics for households with children by food security status in 2014. Now it becomes somewhat more complex when we talk about households with children because we consider food insecurity at the household level, and then within that we consider food insecurity among adults and among children separately. So in 2014, 80.8% of households with children were food secure. So 19.2% were food insecure. Now that statistic refers to anyone in the household experiencing food insecurity. And about half of those households, only adults were food insecure, in 9.8% of households with children, while in 9.4% of households there was food insecurity among children and adults. So in this group of households, the quality or quantity of children's diets was affected by food insecurity. And as I mentioned earlier, we include questions in the survey in which adults or parents in the household respond to food insecurity among their children, where they report if their children are getting enough to eat. So we see again that 9.4% of households with children experienced food insecurity among children where children were directly affected by food insecurity. We find that adults often shield children from experiencing very low food security. That's again the more severe range of food insecurity characterized by disrupted eating patterns and reduced intake. But children along with adults experienced a very low food security in 1.1% of households with children. And that's that dark maroon portion of the pie chart. In these 422,000 households, parents reported that children were hungry. Very low food security among children was essentially unchanged from 0.9% in 2013. In our annual food security report, we include statistics on food insecurity by household characteristics. And some of the factors we look at are income, household composition, race, ethnicity, region, and rural-urban residence. And we find, as you may expect, that food insecurity is much higher for households with incomes below the poverty line, and that food insecurity is higher for single mother households with children. Food insecurity is also more prevalent among households headed by Black non-Hispanic adults and by Hispanic adults. The statistics presented in this chart do not control for income. So some of the differences that we see across household composition and race ethnicity may be are related to differences in income among these groups. And the red portion of the bars represents the prevalence of very low food security, while the yellow portion represents low food security. So the whole bar, the red and yellow portion, represents food insecurity. This chart is similar to the previous one, but shows food insecurity by rural-urban residents. So metropolitan and principal cities refers to principal cities within metropolitan areas, so central cities. Metropolitan, not in principal cities, refers to suburban areas outside cities. So these are still metropolitan, but they're not the central city areas. And then outside metropolitan areas refers to rural areas. And these are all county classifications. So this is the type of county in which the respondent lives. And we see that food insecurity is higher in non-metropolitan counties, moderate in principal cities, and lower in suburban areas. We also see that food insecurity tends to be higher in the South than in other regions. In Table 4 and in Table 5 in the annual report, we present statistics on the prevalence of food insecurity for the states. And we use 3 years of data for these state level estimates. We use 3 years of data, averaging them, to ensure that we have enough, a large enough sample for each state. Now in this map, states shaded that lighter tan color have food insecurity rates that are below the U.S. average. So in terms of food insecurity, these states are better off. States that are shaded gold have food insecurity that's near the U.S. average, and states shaded red have higher food insecurity that's above the U.S. average. So in terms of food insecurity, these states are worse off as they have higher food insecurity rates. And we see considerable variation in food insecurity from state to state. The estimated prevalence of food insecurity in 2012 to 14 ranged from 8.4% in North Dakota to 22% in Mississippi. And the estimated prevalence rates of very low food security ranged from 2.9% in North Dakota to 8.1% in Arkansas. There are a number of factors that relate to interstate differences in food insecurity. One is the characteristics of households within the state. So for example, states that have a higher proportion of low-income households are more likely to have a higher food insecurity rate. Similarly, states in which their population has low education levels, higher rates of disability, or more unemployment are also related to higher food insecurity. The state level economy and policies also matter to state food insecurity rates. And those factors are related to wages, costs of housing, participation in food assistance programs, and things of that nature. And I'll jump in here and say that this graphic is on our website. There's a link at the end of the PowerPoint, a link to our topic page on the ERS website. And if you go to our Key Statistics and Graphics page, you can download this figure and some of the other figures from statistics from our annual report. If you want to use them, you can download them there. This chart shows the prevalence of food insecurity by the length of time over which it is measured. So as I mentioned before, our annual food security statistics refer to the last 12 months. So if someone indicates that they experience food insecurity at any time in the year, they would be considered food insecure. But as you may suspect, most households are not constantly food insecure. And some households were food insecure only earlier in the year, but not in the 30 days prior to the survey. So we also ask about food insecurity during the 30 days prior to the survey. And our survey is conducted in mid-December each year. So this would refer, these 30-day estimates would refer to mid-November to mid-December 2014. And in that 30-day period, we found that 7.9% of U.S. households were food insecure, and 3.4% experienced very low food security. We also estimate the daily prevalence of very low food security during a single day, and that is estimated to be between 0.7 and 1.1% of U.S. households. I will note that the daily prevalence rate is biased downward due to the emission of homeless people from the survey. So the current population survey on which these data is based on household addresses. So people without an address would not be included in the survey, and we suspect that if we were able to include homeless persons, that the daily prevalence of food insecurity of very low food security, might be somewhat higher. In the survey, we also ask about respondents' use of federal food assistance programs, and this table shows the share of food insecure households that participated in one of USDA's 3 largest food assistance programs. So the SNAP program is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. It was formerly known as food stamps. Free or reduced price school lunch is available for school-age children who qualify. And WIC is the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for women, infants, and children. So these are households with young children or pregnant or postpartum women. And we found that 60% of food insecure households participated in one or more of these food assistance programs, and about 44%, the largest percentage, participated in SNAP. We also ask about use of community food assistance programs, and these refer to food pantries, food banks, and then emergency kitchens and soup kitchens. So the first line shows the percentage of all U.S. households who participated or used these services, and 5.5% of all U.S. households reported using a food pantry. We see the percentage of users is much higher among those who experience food insecurity. Over a quarter, 27% of food insecure households reported using a food pantry. The percentage of households that use emergency kitchens is much lower. About 3% of food insecure households used emergency kitchens or soup kitchens. This slide shows median weekly food spending by food security status. And we found that in 2014, among all households, the median weekly food spending, so sort of the average food spending per person, was $50 a week. And food spending was lower among food insecure households, as you might expect, $37.50. And when we take into account estimated food need based on the household size and composition, so the age and gender of household members, we found that the typical food secure household spends about 26% more for food than the typical food insecure household. I'm going to turn now and talk a little bit about the data that underlie these numbers. The U.S. Census Bureau conducts the Food Security Survey through USDA's Economic Research Service. We sponsor the survey. And it's conducted in December of each year. In 2014, 43,000 households were interviewed for the Food Security Supplement, and it was a representative sample of U.S. civilian households. And it is the source of employment and poverty statistics. So in addition to federal food security statistics, it's a source of other federal statistics as well. And the survey questions, if you're interested in seeing them, are listed in the Food Security Report, and they're also posted on the ERS website along with a lot of other food security information. I want to turn now and talk about some economic conditions that might explain recent trends in food insecurity. If you haven't looked at today's USDA blog, you might want to take a look. It talks about some of the overall food insecurity numbers and what factors may be related to trends in food insecurity. Last year, ERS released a research examining the relationships between unemployment, inflation, and food prices. And we found that declining unemployment was related to improvements in food insecurity, but higher inflation and increases in food prices offset the decline in unemployment. And we found that to be true again this year, that rising food prices may have been related to the slow improvement in food insecurity. Inflation was 8.6% from 2010 to 2014, and food prices were up 10.5%. So the increases in food prices were higher than inflation overall. Another factor that may be related to trends in food insecurity is that maximum SNAP allotments fell 5% in November 2013. So some of you may be aware that in April 2009, the ARA, American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, or the stimulus bill, temporarily increased SNAP benefit levels. And from 2009 through October 2013, those benefits were not adjusted for inflation. They were held constant at the higher level. And in November 2013, that benefit from the stimulus bill expired. So SNAP benefits fell 5%. And we found with prior research that from 2009 through 2011, when SNAP benefits were not adjusted for inflation, but food prices continued to increase, the real value of SNAP benefits declined over that time. And with that reduction in the buying power of SNAP, we saw an increase or a worsening of food insecurity for households that relied on SNAP. So this may be a factor affecting food security statistics in 2014 for SNAP recipient households. So in summary, we see that the prevalence of food insecurity in 2014 was essentially unchanged from 2013, but is down from 2011. And food insecurity has been recovering slowly since the recession. This slide provides a link to our website for more information. There's some graphics. There's a media resources page with some information on how to interpret statistics. And there's my email and phone number if you have any questions. And now I think Nancy is going to turn it over to questions. So I'll turn it over to Nancy now.
Thank you very much, Alicia. Please enter any questions you may have now into the chat feature, and I will relay them to Alicia. The first question I have is, do you have any statistics on the specific number of individuals affected by food security versus the households?
Yes, we do. If you have the Food Security Report handy, those statistics are in Table 1A of the report. And in 2014, 48.1 million people lived in food insecure households. And I will say that our food insecurity statistics are at the household level. So within a food insecure household, each household member may be affected differently by the household's food insecurity. So these 48.1 million people living in food insecure households may not have all experienced food insecurity in the same way.
Okay. We have another question about to what extent do these measures of food insecurity measure access to healthy foods, if they do?
So all of these food security statistics are based on household responses to the questions in the food security survey. And some of the questions refer to example, we couldn't afford to eat balanced meals. We relied on only a few kinds of low-cost food to feed our children. So those types of questions that refer to the nutritional quality of the food in the household. So those are based on self-reports. We don't have a direct measure of, for example, we don't ask about people's diets per se to ask about the health of their food, and we don't ask about, when you talk about access, sometimes people are referring to geographic access. So we're not asking about food deserts or things like that. We're really referring to economic access, so being able to afford healthy food and enough food for your family.
Okay. We have a question about food insecure households that are taking advantage of food assistance. You mentioned that 60% of them or so are taking advantage of food assistance. Why aren't the rest doing the same? Do you have information as to why they're not taking advantage of it?
Sure. So some of those households may not be eligible. So we know that food insecurity is certainly related to income, but not all food insecure households are very low income. So some households may not qualify for food assistance programs. They may be above the income cutoff, and they may have other factors that are affecting their food insecurity, like high costs in other areas or something, like high medical expenses or something of that nature. But they might not qualify for food assistance based on their income. And some of those programs there have to be children in the household. So for example, WIC and school lunch and school meals programs are not available to all households. There are specific households based on their structure and the age of the people in them. And then some people may have difficulty accessing the programs. They may have difficulty signing up, or they may just choose not to sign up for some other reason.
Okay. Is there any data that's broken down to the state level that you have available for people?
We only publish overall state level statistics, and this is because of it's a limitation with the sample size, and we only want to publish statistics that we consider reliable and accurate. So we have statistics overall at the state level, and those are based on 3 years of data. We'd have to combine many more years of data, for example, to look at state level estimates by household composition or race, ethnicity, or something like that.
Okay. We have a question about sometimes the media and other groups can misreport food insecurity information. Do you have any anything on the website that helps people understand what the statistics actually mean?
We do. On our media resources page, which if you go to this Food Security in the U.S. topic page on the left-hand bar, you'll see a listing of different things you can click on, and one is media resources. And on that page we include a section called Getting It Right with some recommendations for how to interpret the statistics and what statistics really mean. And we're always available to answer questions that reporters or researchers or advocates or anyone has about the numbers. We'd be happy to respond to questions.
Okay, here's another question. Has there been any shift in the geographic concentration of food insecurity over time? And any shifts between rural, urban, and suburban balance? Have you noticed any changes?
So this year that question is a little bit more difficult. And without getting into too many technical details, every 10 years or so after the census, after the decennial census, the rural-urban classifications of counties changes. So in 2013, the federal government redefined some counties. So for example, a county that may have been non-metropolitan is now defined as metropolitan based on the new census data. And those new classifications were first implemented in the Food Security Survey this year. So our statistics on rural-urban residents are not directly comparable to previous years because of that change in classification for some of the counties. So you have to be cautious interpreting statistics for metropolitan or non-metropolitan counties in 2014 to previous years. In 2014 we found that food insecurity rates were the highest in non-metropolitan areas and moderate in large cities and the lowest in the suburbs. In general, we find that food insecurity tends to be higher in non-metropolitan counties and in principal city counties and lower in suburban areas.
Okay. Could you discuss state SNAP participation rates a little and how reliable they are, and whether any correlations, if there are any correlations with rates of food insecurity?
That is a little bit outside my area of expertise, and I don't want to get anything wrong. I would refer questions on state SNAP participation rates to the Food and Nutrition Service. And if the person with that question wants to follow up with an email to Nancy or I, we can get you in touch with someone who can better respond to that.
Okay. Let's see. Are there any plans to increase the number of racial and ethnic groups included in the survey?
So the racial and ethnic classifications are somewhat limited by the survey data. There are a lot more, we could go into a lot more detail on race ethnic groups. We're limited by the number of people within those groups. One thing that we've put up on our website this year to look at trends over time in food insecurity and very low food security by race and ethnic groups is we have an interactive data visualization. And you can link to that from our data product page. And I can send you a link to that if you're looking for it. And that will be updated with the 2014 statistics later today. But we include graphics on trends over time from 2001 to 2014 in race, ethnicity for food insecurity and very low food security, and trends over time by household composition as well.
Okay. I have another question about children that are food insecure. How many children are currently food insecure based on your data? Is the statistic still 1 in 5? that even correct? Or was that even correct? I don't know.
The 1 in 5 would more accurately refer to food insecure households, for households with children. And that statistics is in 2014 was that 19.2% of households with children were food insecure in 2014. And let me go back. Let me pull up this slide again. Bear with me for just one moment while I find it. I want to go back to the pie chart where I talked about food insecurity in households with children. So this 19.2% refers to household level food insecurity in households with children. And as I mentioned in the survey, we ask specifically about food insecurity among adults and food insecurity among children directly. So for some of the children's questions, we asked, for example, we relied on only a few kinds of low-cost food to feed our children because we were running out of money to buy food. Was that often, sometimes, or never true for you in the last 12 months? And there's 8 questions that are related to food insecurity among children. So in these 9.4% of households, that would more accurately reflect food insecurity among children. So if you were looking for a number for households with children where children were food insecure, you can say about 1 in 10 households with children experienced food insecurity among those children. The 1 in 5, or 19.2% of households, would more accurately reflect household food insecurity in which someone in the household was food insecure, but in some of those households, again, only adults had food insecurity or reported food insecurity.
Okay. Do you have any statistics on how urban farms or community gardens are being used to reduce food insecure neighborhoods?
That's an interesting question. These statistics refer to the household. We don't have statistics on neighborhood food security as related to urban agriculture and so forth. And the most disaggregated geographic estimates are for the state level. We don't have estimates for certain geographic areas. So I can't really comment on food insecurity in specific areas that have community gardens. And so I would just end there, that I just can't say in detail how urban gardens would affect specific communities, just because I haven't done research in that area.
Okay. How do you measure the reason why the households are food insecure? Is it just a small factor such as budgeting, or is it some other reason?
So we base food security status on 18 survey questions, and these are just 3 examples of the survey questions that I have on this slide. And we ask households the series of questions, and then we base their food security status on how many questions they respond affirmatively to. So an affirmative response would say that that was often or sometimes true for them, or yes, they, for example, cut the size of their meals or skip meals. And households that have 3 or more affirmative responses are classified as food insecure. Households with 0 or only 1 or 2 affirmative responses to food insecure conditions are classified as food secure. So households have to affirm at least 3 items to be considered food insecure. And then from there, based on the number of items they affirm, we classify them as having low food security, or if they affirm more items, very low food security. And households with children are classified as having very low food security if they report 8 or more of the 18 conditions. And households without children are classified as having very low food security if they report 5 or more. 6 or more, excuse me. 6 or more food insecurity conditions. So households that respond affirmatively to 3 to 5 items, if they do not have children, are classified as low food secure.
So I have a question about children with very low food security. Did it increase from 1.0 to 1.2%, and is this increase statistically significant?
So in 2013, let me flip to that page in my report. 0.9% of households had very low food security among children. 0.9% of households with children reported very low food security among children. And in 2014 it was 1.1%, and that change was not statistically significant. So what we mean there is that that could have resulted from sampling variation. We can't say that the change was statistically significant.
Is it possible to access the raw data?
Yes, so the Household Food Security data is the Current Population Survey Food Security Supplement. And as I mentioned, that data is collected by Census, and it's available for download from their website, and they've posted that data today. So you can analyze the raw survey data, and if there's directions on our website about how to find the data and access it. And it's available free of charge. Anyone can download and use it. I do recommend taking a look at the technical documentation, and there's technical documentation on our website and also available through the Census website.
Okay, I think that's all the questions we have. If anybody wants a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, you can email myself at nmcniff@ers.usda.gov, or you can email Alicia, and we'll get the copy of the presentation to you. This webinar is being recorded, and it will also be posted on the website. It may take a few days for that to happen, however, so it won't be it has to be captioned first before we put it up. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Alicia, and everybody have a wonderful day.
Thank you.